They say that everyone in Malice is born with a distinct color, a color that defines the house they live in, the work they do, and the friends they have. There are exactly three of them. It's not the color of your eyes, your hair, or your skin, but a particular spot behind your left hand's thumb. It could be ruby, blue, or green. The birth of a child is celebrated highly in Malice. The parents of the new little creature brought to this world are gifted with baskets and presents and many friendly handwritten cards. The mayor himself is present at every birth, dressed up all formally and nice. Of course, the task is quite easy as our town is rather small. Nobody even cares about the gender of the child. All we worry about is figuring out the color of its thumb. We all act surprised and a little shocked when finding out if the child is a ruby, a blue, or a green, though in reality, it is all just for show. The child is born to a family of a distinct color, of course, and so their color will usually be the same as the one of their parents and siblings. It is tradition, however, that the mayor himself announces the color of the new child. That's how it's always been, and the people here curiously await his call every time, right after birth, even before the father gets to see his kin. It is of utter importance to be fast. That's what my mother told me. The color you see doesn't stay forever. A day would be the outer maximum. You need to be sure of the color there and then to assure that the child fits its environment, or else. I wondered back then, but I never quite got the right answer. Now the color coding is an old tradition, of course, and naturally we have embedded into current times, though the cultural aspects are still quite present, or at least parts of them. For starters, I am the child of a proud Ruby family. The bricks of our house are rusty red. Every year for my birthday, Mom bakes a delicious red velvet cake, and Dad even says that our blood is ruby while the other blood is tainted. I happen to have red hair as well, although that is just a coincidence, even if it's a lucky one. Both my parents are blonde. Mom dyed her hair a few times, but it's not quite the same. Not that the color of one's hair should matter. We live a harmonic life. It's all quite sheltered. We're a close-knit community, and while we are coded in different colors, we still get along nicely with everyone. At my school there are kids of all groups. We do assignments together at times or sit together during lunch. My close friends happen to be Ruby as well, but of course, that is not a requirement. I went to preschool in a neighborhood predominated by Ruby families, and so naturally, the first friends I made were Ruby, just like me. We didn't bond over color, but over toys and games and pranks we played. When I got into elementary school, I had a few blue friends, but they usually stayed in their groups as well. Just how it naturally flows. I don't despise anyone. Everyone in town is rather nice anyway. Well, that is not entirely true. While my parents always taught me to be kind and open-minded, there is one particularly family that they warned me about when I was little. Now the paranoia is ingrained into my brain, and unfortunately, it swayed over to other members just a tiny bit. I try not to generalize, but sometimes it's hard. When I first saw the house that my parents warned me about, I was more astonished than scared. It was placed in a green neighborhood, just at the border to a blue one. I only walked past it by accident on my way home from school. Usually, I walked a different route, but I had been lost in my thoughts, and before I knew it, I was looking at a house that wasn't exactly like the others. Now, I'm not entirely sure about the color of the building itself, but it surely looked green, with all the ivory covering it from bottom to top. It took me a second look to even recognize the forest green door in between. There was more to it than simply strange looks too. When I walked by the house, it radiated a smell. One that is not simple to describe, but the association in my mind made it feel like belonging. It reminded me of the smell of fresh sheets that you get comfortable in with a new set of pajamas after a warm shower. It felt both like nature and home. Despite the cold of November, I stood still on the sidewalk, not able to keep my eyes off it. I'm not even sure how long I stood there for. Part of me almost walked up to the door. It was almost as if something inside of it was calling me, trying to welcome me. That's when I noticed there was someone behind the fogged up window and heard the noise of something distant but shrill. I saw fingers with sharp nails scratching the window. At first, I thought that this family might have a dog. Curiously, I walked a step closer, only to realize that the eyes of the creature were not friendly. They were red and dark with many bags underneath. As they met mine, the face got even closer to the window, pressing their forehead against it while mouthing something I couldn't understand. When I impulsively took a step back, the whispers became a loud scream. "What are you doing here, child? Go home!" At first, I thought it was coming from the house, but when I turned around, I realized that an older gentleman was shouting at me. He was dressed in a blue raincoat, and while his mouth was formed into a smile, his eyes were showing a deep terror. I started running and didn't stop until I reached my rusty red home. I just realized just in time that whatever lived in there wasn't trying to welcome me. It wanted to lure me in. At first, I was unsure whether to tell my parents what I had witnessed. They were quite protective of me. I was their miracle, as Dad liked to say. You see, my parents tried to have children for a very long time before they finally had me. Dad told me how Mom cried the entire first week after I was born because she couldn't believe how lucky she was to finally hold me in her arms. They loved me and proved it each day, which is why I knew they would freak out. Both my parents were more than fond of our beautiful community, and they wouldn't like it if they knew that something here scared me. Little did I know that they would be the ones enhancing my fear. "Do not ever go near that house again," my dad said in a stern voice. "They are not like us. They shouldn't even be here, but we have to accept everyone, you know. It doesn't mean you need to interact with them. They are not right," my mother added with a little more compassion. "What do you mean they are not right?" I asked. My parents exchanged a glance. "You know how everyone in Malice is gifted with a special color? We do that because the old tradition tells us to. With the right color in your mind, you will live a healthy and prosperous life. That's why our crop is always exquisite. Why we never get sick but instead grow unusually old. We are lucky because we follow the rituals. Unfortunately, there are some who naturally feel drawn to chaos and pain, and they want to bring it upon all of us." "What chaos?" I asked. "They want to spill red, the red that is inside of us," Mother responded. My heart started beating faster. None of what my parents were telling me matched the image I had of our surroundings. I had never known fear in my life. I was happy. I had many friends. It got me quite angry hearing that some people wanted to change that for no reason but pettiness. "Why can't we remove them from town?" I asked. My parents laughed in response. "That would be easy, wouldn't it? Though we can't force anyone to leave, they need to do it on their own." I had to promise my parents to never walk by that street again, but of course, I couldn't keep my promise. I was far too curious. While a part of me was frightened, another told me that it was merely a house. The following day after school, I told my friends I had to run errands for my parents. As they walked back the Ruby Road, I tried to find my way back to the Ivy house. It wasn't hard to find, even though it looked a lot different from what I saw the other day. The house was drenched in blood. It was coming from the windows and dropping down to the green grass. Big drops of blood. Of course, it could have been regular paint, but at that moment, it didn't even matter. Whatever it was, it appeared to be a sign. I was ready to make my way home, acting like I hadn't seen anything, when I heard a voice. It was quiet, just a whisper, and it sounded like a child. "Come in." I looked around, but I was the only person on the street. I took a small step closer towards the house, and there it was again. "Come to me." That's when I stepped back and started running again. My parents were right. There was something awfully wrong with that house and the people living inside. They were trying to create chaos and were succeeding too. I don't think about the house on the green street a lot more after that. I always made sure not to cross it, especially not on my own. As I grew older and got my own driver's license, there was no need to take the shortcut again. Of course, I wasn't as scared as I was back then, but I figured it was better to be safe than sorry. I did spend more time in the blue neighborhood. However, as I got to high school, I realized that you don't need to be friends with someone simply because you grew up in the same surroundings. My new friends mostly worked, helping their parents in the mines or in the factories, while I was usually helping out at the ice cream store, but we would meet up after work to do more relaxing stuff. Whenever I invited them to my home, my parents were super friendly. They were smiling and telling them nice things about their parents. They'd usually let us hang out in the living room and bring us snacks. I feel like my parents spent more time with me when friends were around than whenever I was all alone. I lived quite content with the limited mindset until one person came along who would change my view on the color concept of malice. Jonas. He came to the ice cream shop every day ordering a scoop of mint and one scoop of strawberry, a combination that sounded rather disgusting to me, but he swore that it fit perfectly. Jonas came back every other day, and shortly he became the one thing I looked forward to the most when going to work. I didn't tell my parents or friends about my new crush. Of course, they all acted very acceptingly and open-minded all the time, but I knew they would be reacting in an old-fashioned manner if they found out that Jonas was born a green baby. Honestly, after a while, it didn't even matter to me, but the more we hung out, the more he made apparent that we shouldn't tell anyone just now. It's our secret for now. Back then, I thought that was romantic. We were from the same small town, but still from different worlds. "What about your family? What are they like?" I once asked him. "Well, I don't have any siblings, but my parents are very loving. They don't interact much with others here though." "Why not?" He laughed. "Well, because they're not as appreciated as yours." Even though he was laughing, I could sense a bitterness in his tone. As a child, I was unaware of it, but by now, it was more than apparent to me that the colors in our town meant far more than what kind of neighborhood you lived in. It was a symbol of status. Red families had more money, lived longer on average, and received a better education. Blue families were usually somewhere in the middle, and the green ones were the worst off. They didn't get great jobs, had the worst neighborhoods, and hardly any chance to get out of it. The reds and blues didn't interact with them much, separating the people even more. Jonas taught me about all that. Sometimes I almost felt like he resented me for the privilege I was born into, though he never showed it. He asked about my day, asked about my parents. He wanted to know how they treated me, what work they did, and everything else. He was way interested in my life, but never shared much of his. I was wearing the biggest rose-colored glasses you could imagine. In my eyes, everything was right about him. I loved his blonde hair that would get even brighter in the sun. I loved his kind smile, but mostly, I loved the way he smelled. He smelled just like home. The glasses only fell off when I came home one afternoon to be greeted by a present in my bed. It was a flower bouquet. There were roses and tulips, but something else, something that looked very familiar. Ivy. That's when it clicked, when I realized that it wasn't a coincidence that Jonas visited me in the ice cream shop. He had been targeting me. It started all the way back then when I walked past that house, but I simply didn't understand why. Whatever was going on, it was not right. I knew for a fact that my parents didn't let him inside, which meant that he had broken in to leave the flowers on my bed. Until this point, I thought I knew Jonas well, but in that moment, it all shattered. I ran down the stairs to grab my phone, but I couldn't find it. When I heard the noises from the garden and saw my mother's blonde hair in between the bushes, I felt intense relief. Mom was out there often. She loved planting flowers. It was her most favorite thing to do. She wouldn't even let me help her. Quickly, I opened the door and ran outside. "Mom? Hey, love." When the figure moved up, I realized that I hadn't seen my mother's hair. It was Jonas, knees deep inside of my mom's flower bed. "Did you like your death flowers?" He laughed. I took a step back and got ready to run, but Jonas had already gotten up from the dirt. "You can leave in a sec. I just want you to see this first." There was something strangely calm about his voice. It didn't match the atmosphere at all. "What are you doing?" I said while trying to sound confident. He had played with my head and I was fuming. I figured it out. "What are you talking about? You need to get out of here." He just laughed, his eyes radiating malice. "Don't you understand? You don't belong here. You never have." "Jonah." He got up from the dirt. His hands were shaking as he towered over me, but suddenly he didn't look mad anymore. There were tears in his eyes. "I knew it. They killed them all." "Who?" I murmured while taking another step back. I had to get away from here quickly. He waved me over. "Just have one quick glance, okay?" He didn't have any weapons. He was digging in the dirt with his hands. I knew Dad would be back home soon. I just needed to stall some time. I slowly moved towards the destroyed flower bed. Jonas was pointing at something deep underneath the dirt and flowers that he had spread all over. They looked like tiny coffins. What's that?" Jonas looked at me with a sad smile. "My dead siblings." I'm not sure what happened next. Jonas came close, too fast, and before I knew it, everything turned dark. I woke up in a dark room. I was lying in bed, but I wasn't alone. Someone was cradling me. I felt a dry hand move up and down my cheeks. I tried to move, but my body was too stiff. I tried to scream, but before any words came out, the person started whispering. "Shh, it's okay. You're home now." My eyes were heavy, but as they got adjusted, I saw the person. It was an older woman. Jonas was there as well, holding my hand. I wanted to crush his hand and his skull next. He had not only betrayed me, he kidnapped me, took me from my safe home, from my family. But that was before I realized that I was the one that had taken his life, or saved it, depending on how you like to interpret it. The woman grazed my face and my hair. Her eyes looked just like mine, and in between the gray strands, I could identify a few red ones. "I'm sorry if my appearance scares you. I haven't been able to leave the house much, you see," she said with a sad smile. As it turns out, the color behind the thumb of a child doesn't always depend on their family. The privilege we were born into was entirely random. My so-called Ruby parents were trying to have a child that would fit their kind, but only managed to have babies that were not the right color. Before it was even announced, they made them disappear underneath the dirt. With the prestige my parents had in town, they could do whatever they wanted. "You and I," Jonas spoke, "we were born on the very same day, in the very same hospital, only minutes apart. You were born red, and I was born green, two families whose color we didn't match." Jonas was supposed to die, just like all the other kids my parents had before. But when they saw my ruby red thumb and the little strands of red hair, they knew they wanted me, and they would do anything to get me. It was perfect. We were born at the same time, and no one would ever know. My real parents didn't have much of a choice. Nobody in this town would help them. They didn't have the money or power to fight the Ruby families. The only thing they could do at this point was to save the life of an innocent boy who otherwise would have been sacrificed. All their life, they were threatened. My fake family did whatever they could to make sure they stayed far away from me, sending them blood as a threat, slowly poisoning them and making sure all of the town was against them. For years they were driven by fear, but not anymore. It was time this concept of color ended, and we would start by turning their ruby red house into burning red flames.